is Rob Mark and I'm the head of the Centre for Lifelong Learning. I'm also the coordinator of the Dialogue project. So what we want you to think about today when you come to discuss the issues later on is what use is this research in any way to me? And I'm really pleased that we have Val Bissland here. Val has been a tutor for many years. She's completed her doctorate around some research on the neurosciences and adult learning. And what I have asked Val to do today is to talk to you about some of the issues coming out of that.
My research looked at learning styles and communication styles, and in that process I discovered there were all sorts of neuroscience feeding in. The ability of brain cells to remodel themselves and change physically and functionally throughout all of life in response to experience. That's a new fact, if you like, a scientific fact now. At one time it was thought our brain cells were genetically powered when we were small, and genes really drove our brain development. Well, genes play a very big part, but in the environment and how you, what sort of influences you're exposed to in your life will make a huge difference to the sort of brain you have. This is more like a little cross-section of your brain here. Your brain's a little clusters of neurons, and this one here is sort of breaking away and flying off to join a new cluster. And that's what happens when you're learning. Bits of information that you thought were complete, you find they're not so complete, and they join up with the new information. And sometimes, of course, they fly away and never seen again. Create links to your existing knowledge. Well, what teachers have done, and it's not something new, teachers have always tried to find clues to link older knowledge to new knowledge. The most important single factor influencing learning is what you already know. And this is a key thing for any adult learning, that people are coming to the classroom with a whole range of concepts already, and they're not going to take what you say and just sort of slot it on a shelf somewhere. They have to knit it in there, to take those ideas and say, well, how does this make sense with what I already know? And the heart of successful learning is activating many parts of the brain. So the job of any teacher is to help people learn in their own way, and in my research I found there are many, many ways older adults like to learn, because people have totally different ways of approaching learning. Tony Buzan, I think, was the first educator to realise the potential of the brain science. Only now are educators and neuroscientists talking to each other, and there you see the memory principles with the main branches: imagination, association, exaggeration, all the things that actually help to make an experience more memorable. That's just one technique that's come from the brain sciences, and it was evaluated recently and found, interestingly, to be a very good way that university students like to learn rather than a lecture. When they mind map together, not in isolation, but got together in a group, they found it a very, very effective way of getting at their understanding into a deeper level. So they were actually doing deep processing in a social and an emotional way. So ideas become more visual, tangible, manipulative, and therefore they become more concrete. We're not just learning machines, and so motivation, empathy, interpersonal skills, when you are enjoying yourself, when you are having fun, when you are talking to people, when you are developing ideas, when you're being excited by what you're doing, your brain is flooding with chemicals. Dopamine is one of them, when you're really in a good frame of mind. And acetylcholine is essential chemical to cement those connections, because those connections are very fragile when you learn something new. Saying that environmental influences could change the brain's structure to create more than 50% difference in how we learn. Now that's the learning environment. So a change in view of people's potential, and I think that's, to me, that's one of the greatest influences of the brain sciences. We're only touching the potential. We're capable of so much more than we think. An emotionally healthy and exciting environment promotes optimal learning. They've discovered with specialised neurons in our brains that tune in to other people. Actually, when a person does or is conveying a feeling to you, your neurons in your part of your brain fire. Now you're not having those feelings, you're just watching that person. And yet these neurons fire. Through evolution, we're hardwired for cooperation and interaction. I think I'm experiencing talking, presenting to you, you're viewing, and yet if our brains were scanned, there'd be areas of your brain lighting up as if you were talking. We do have these special neurons that they didn't know existed before. These are just some examples that are fairly typical of the comments people made. More student participation, less formality, the importance of friendliness, the social interaction, critical, not just for older learners, but really for all learners. And also this idea of learning by doing. Our brains learn through these different parts of them all coordinating, seeing, hearing, doing. And discussion are far greater than the old days and lead to better learning and a more enjoyable experience. Discussion came through as a very, very important element of understanding. I prefer to have exercise and discuss afterwards mistakes people have made. You learn quite a lot from feedback. And this idea of immediate feedback. So that means mistakes are okay. Mistakes are good. Mistakes are how we learn. So fine-tuning is making it fit your brain, making it make sense to you. So we've looked at brain plasticity, making meaning, social and emotional, cultural factors, and exciting learning environments. And the first question is, do you think these insights have any relevance for your classroom learning? How might we use the findings to improve your learning experience in practical ways? And if you have time, look at this one. Do you have any suggestions how findings from research in general could have more impact on lifelong learning?
Really, we started out by saying that for some of us the concepts were new and therefore extremely interesting. We really felt that they're clearly important because they do help you to determine prior learning and where you're moving from one learning situation to another. Most people individually will show preference for a particular style in a particular task. So when they're combined, we felt, then we have probably the greatest impact in terms of learning when all of these aspects in teaching are combined. We found the concept of the mirror neurons particularly interesting because we think that's what happens whenever we get together, as we did round the tables in discussion, and that allows us to fire off each other, to pick up on new ideas, to see things from a different perspective.
We all agreed that there was this element of use it or lose it. If you don't use your brain, it's just going to just ossify and it won't do anything at all. Style of learning was very important. Style of learning from the teacher's point of view, imparting the learning, and from the student, to use that phrase, how they are going to acquire the learning. It could be something that we should maybe look at, that getting an awareness of our learning style, because all we were really aware of was there's the theory and there's the practice.
Well, by and large, our group was fascinated by what Val told us, and a lot of it was new. Sometimes we knew terms and we'd seen things mentioned in newspapers, but we really didn't know a great deal. So by and large, we found it a very, very useful session. We had a good discussion about enjoyable learning. I think we felt that the Scottish education system didn't encourage enjoyment often in learning, and that therefore it was a very positive step if enjoyment can be built into learning and can make it much more successful. However, just a slight question about whether all types of learning at all levels can always be enjoyable. Learning can be difficult, it can be challenging, it can question existing attitudes, all sorts of things, and sometimes there can be stages, so I don't think it should always be seen as a fun event, but I think we did feel that we would like to see enjoyment as something integral to the learning process. We felt that learning was very much a two-way process, that although there was a lot of responsibility on a tutor to encourage learning, there was also responsibility on the part of the students to input and to take what they wanted from learning. And then we had a brief discussion about mind mapping, although mind mapping perhaps in fact probably is a very underused learning tool. It's not the only one.
Well, the answer to question 1 was yes by a unanimous vote, as we all experienced the chalk and talk education, a vertical downward transmission of knowledge. We all feel that there should be far more activity in learning and the prevention of boredom, which itself is the one major thing that prevents learning. And the second question, teacher planning lesson sessions. Obviously, you should try and build in as many modes. Obviously, you can't build them all into every lesson, but they should be presented with the idea that the learner does have a preferred learning style. Also, the use of mind mapping. I started teaching mind mapping in 1990 when I was teaching, and technology in all its forms. Finally, the modern research, neuroscience and learning. I think that should be in all teacher training at all levels, primary, secondary, tertiary. Indeed, you might even say all professions would benefit. How do you provide motivation? Yeah, partially through what we're talking about enthusiasm, things like that.
Thanks, Val. I was in the green group, which we defined made us all teachers of one sort and another, which maybe explains why one of the things we talked about a lot was our own question. Teachers never been satisfied with anybody else as we made up our own, and it was what would a teacher do with the new neuroscience once they had it? What would they actually do with it in the classroom? How might pedagogy change? And I think we were saw that as quite a key issue for taking this work forward. I think a lot of our discussion revolved around quite familiar terms like active and passive learning. And we were aware, I think, that activity or active learning is a label for a whole variety of things that go on, often set up in opposition for rhetorical reasons with the notion of passive learning. And a few of us kind of question the idea, how can you be learning passively and so on. But in that sense, the idea of the mirror neuron was quite an interesting one for us, because we were suggesting perhaps that maybe what went on in lectures was a bit more active than some of the opponents of lecturing would have you believe, and that quite possibly by implication there's maybe less learning going on in so-called active learning activities than people might believe. We moved also, stepped back from the classroom a bit and looked at the social cultural context for education and learning, which we thought was in some ways even more decisive, because that might well define what teachers can and can't do. And we posed the question, how would this approach and the insights in Val's talk sit with somebody like Michael Gove? And I personally was very convinced of the idea he would just reject this as completely airy-fairy nonsense and nothing to do with a curriculum of knowledge and hard work, paid for out of your own pockets in order for it to be valuable and digitised and supported by Rupert Murdoch or some such person. I just thought that some of the ideas about plasticity, creativity, etc. might actually go down very well with a rhetoric of these being vital skills for business and employment and so forth. And I think we had a quite interesting beginning of a discussion. Would Scotland approach education differently through the curriculum of excellence, for example, than the kind of Gove-style curriculum of south of the border? And one of our members who's left now taught for a time in England and was suggesting that perhaps the English view, philosophy if you like, of education was really very different from the Scottish, and much less taken on with the idea of the rounded person that Scotland's supposed to identify.
Things about students and how they might learn and how we might support students better, and maybe we need to be more concerned with making sure people think about how they learn as well as doing the learning in different subjects. The old idea of study skills and support, and what does that mean for us today? We need to also ensure that the teachers have the knowledge to bring this over too. So thank you all in the middle here, all the people that came along and give your thoughts and views, because that's very important too. And I think we've done something new today, and hopefully it's the beginning of something that can help improve our practices in teaching and in learning. So thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you all again at some of our seminars. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.